Hey everyone, welcome to another artwork analysis video. My name is Alex, or you can call me the Angry Asian Artist, and I will be talking about Bobby Chiu's work today. Quite simply, Bobby Chiu is my mentor. He is a fantastic teacher, and he's a great artist, one of my favorite artists of all time. Now, you might have noticed that his work in general is very different from what I do, but trust me, he taught me a lot of things that I apply to my current work nowadays as well. As with the rest of Imaginism Studios, so thank you for that if you by any chance was watching this. Anyways, I want to talk about his work and what he brings to the table here that I feel is very strong and demonstrates a lot of really good ways to really create compositions. And first, I'm going to talk about rhythm. So, rhythm is something that is more subjective, less technical. You could look at it from a technical standpoint, but even then, a lot of times you're feeling out the composition, you're feeling the rhythm rather than really thinking, well, I am a robot, I can do rhythm here, and I can put rhythm here, etc., etc. So, with Bobby Chiu's work, he tends to balance a lot of creatures and or other subject matters. He has a lot of different subject matter going around in his piece. So how he balances his work and how he gets people to look around the piece is to use the subject matter in order to create a unified rhythm. What I mean by that is even though there are eight fur balls here, all of them are bringing one single rhythm, one movement. And, or rather, each aspect of them is bringing a certain rhythm, and all of those aspects put together create the composition. So that sounds a little bit confusing, right? But I'm gonna really draw out what I mean. So first of all, we can notice that the ears of these creatures are highlighted with red over a green background. If we were to connect all of these ears put together, we create a harmonious rhythm. We're looking through all of those ears. None of them are singular. None of them are isolated instances. They're all part of the big picture. Now, as you probably would have guessed by now, the tails are also creating a fantastic rhythm. Here you go. And so again, since there are so many tails going on, we can relate ourselves to these tales and look along the movement, the implied movement. It's not like Bobby is literally creating this purple line across the piece. However, the fact that the tails are creating these points where we can look through them creates sort of like a connect four type of thing. You're connecting the dots rather. You're connecting all the tails together into one rhythm. And if we were to combine all of these ears together, you'll notice that the rhythm is sort of curated, it's very musical. It's sort of like a roller coaster-ish thing. And it, again, this rhythm is subjective. And a lot of cases, if he is trying to create a certain feeling, a certain action in a piece, this implied rhythm matters. And what I mean by that is, if he wanted a very actiony piece, a very stark piece, this implied movement could be much sharper. So imagine if I were to create a piece like this. The rhythm is creating that mood. It's creating a very actiony scene. It's very sharp. Everything is chaotic. So that creates a certain rhythm. Whereas in this piece, it's very harmonious. It's very melodic. It's just very calm. The rhythm in this case is creating an implied mood, and that mood is fitting for such a piece. So as you might have noticed as well, if we were to go through even more, the eyes, the yellow eyes as well, all of them are creating one movement. And as you can see here, again, it pushes that narrative. So I want to talk about exception now. So we talked about everything that has commonality. The ears, the eyes, tails, they're all harmoniously creating that composition. But what's the exception? Very simple. The exception is the focal point. So there are 8 creatures here, and 7 of them, while they're different in sizes and a little bit of difference in shapes, the biggest difference is the middle furball here. That's not green. It's whiter than the other ones. There's a different mood to it. His eyes, or her eyes, I don't know, I don't want to assume the gender here, are half closed, and obviously there's bubbles says going through this creature. Now, we created a rhythm through the piece. So now, if everything is harmonious, the viewers are not going to be able to see what we're supposed to be looking at. We need something for the viewer to rest on, or else we're just going to go through the rhythms and going through out of the canvas. We don't want that. We want them to look into the piece, to rest on the piece. And how you create that is to create a focal point, and that's called the exception. When you have a ton of subject matter, we already established that in order to make sure that they're not too chaotic, you give them a common element or different elements. It doesn't have to be one, but we create that unity through that. But in order to have the viewer rest, we need something interesting. We need an exception. And exceptions are always going to stand out, obviously. If you were to wear a black shirt in a crowd of white shirts, then you end up standing out. So in this case, it's very similar. It might sound very obvious, but trust me, this stuff is very deliberate, and artists always have to be thinking about just how much of an exception is needed in order to capture the viewers without taking over. And that is actually a legitimate concern. It's very easy for a viewer to take sort of look at something way too much. We don't want that much attention for something. We want the viewer to, while they want to rest on the focal point, they also want to look around the piece. So there are cases where if you were to put too much attention, it starts killing the piece. So let's for hypothetical sake, we assume Bobby Chiu wanted this to be the same focal point, but he accidentally added too much attention. So let's say he uses a bright pink here. So not to say this is a very good way of demonstrating it, but you might have noticed that the piece is now not very unified because this is so much attention, so much exception. that it entirely makes everything else irrelevant, and that is not very good. Hopefully that makes sense. So the last thing I want to talk about is the divide. So we have something as artists called the interesting divides. Um, in a canvas, we start off with basically nothing. So one thing that we could do is to establish a painting based off of very large divides. So generally speaking, if we want to make it interesting, we do not want the divides to be in the center. So already you look at it and it's like, oh man, it's a little bit static. It's not really cutting the canvas in an interesting manner because everything is evenly divided. However, if we were to base our compositions on more interesting divides, look at this. All four quadrants are different sizes, and this is infinitely more interesting. Now, if you were to go back to Bobby Chiu's work, now I'm a little bit off here, you might have noticed that the divide is in a very interesting manner. It's not a static composition. If you establish this thing, these two lines early, or even if you're dividing your piece into thirds or fourths, it doesn't matter. If you divide your piece into interesting quadrants, your piece, no matter what you put, no matter what subject matter you decide to paint, it will look infinitely more interesting than if I were to create a piece that is entirely centered, or if you were to create your piece, rather. So, to end it off, let's again assume Bobby Chiu makes a mistake. Not implying anything, but if I were to cut the piece into something like this. So, okay, it's still rendered very well. It's still very interesting. It still has interesting rhythm and stuff. But notice that it's just missing something. It's just not that interesting anymore. Here's the original, and here's the cut. So again, it's entirely because of the cut. If he's established the fact that everything has to be centered, then the piece already is killed off. It's just not interesting. And this is something that, again, maybe he's not thinking it consciously, maybe he is, but most artists will understand that you want to avoid that disinteresting cut, the divides. Anyways, thank you for listening. Hopefully this was helpful, and I'll see you next time.